Troy Cassar-Daley, welcome back to Australian Musician.
It's fantastic to be back, and thanks for having me.
We're talking today about your new album, which is coming out on March 19th. It's called The World Today. I just wanted to go back to your last album, The Things I Carry Around, which was from 2016. You also released an autobiography to go with that album. I'm just wondering, was that releasing the book, was it a kind of a signing off of a chapter of your life and the beginning of something new?
It definitely was. I had to sort of touch upon quite a few things in my life, not only as a musician, but as a human being that I really thought I'd left behind. And to put a full stop on it was pretty important. And also to sort of show the next chapter of my life. I mean, the next chapter of my life is really going into music, and, a lot of it already has been covered in the media. When people do a story on you, you already cover off on that. But it's all that personal stuff from the first parts of your life that I think are the ones that actually form you. That was a really, really important part of the book for me. And I just think you get molded into what you are for a reason. And I was able to cover off on that with the book.
Yeah. We'll move on to the new album. 2020 was a horrible year for everybody, but reading your press release, it was a pretty heavy year for yourself. You lost your dad in 2019. It says that your marriage was rocky. You weren't touring. How did you stay on top of things emotionally?
It was music. When I did mention in the actual press release, I think, and that, to be honest, that's one of the most personal press releases I've ever written.
Yeah.
And one of my friends who's a journalist in Brisbane said, "Do you really want that out there?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I do," because as it mentioned, I used to find places to hide with music as a kid. I came from a pretty dysfunctional background with my parents breaking up at a very early age. And when things were reasonably tough, where I was really missing my dad or I was really missing my mum, I used to find the only escape and the place to hide was music. And I think that's exactly what happened to me at this stage of my life. When you turn 50, you don't expect to go back to your childhood and use music exactly the same way. But I did. I found music to be a home, to be a place of safety, and creating music this time around was one of the only mental health things I think I had that was going to allow me to get through to the next stage, whether it was going to be save a marriage or whether it was going to be to get over the grief of losing my dad. Music was at the core of that whole thing for me.
Yeah. So is it difficult to write during tough times, or do the lyrics come easier?
Look, I think it was easier to write during this time of adversity that we're all going through. It wasn't just me. I've talked to some friends who said that it had a different effect on them. COVID made them go into a non-creative sort of a state where they were just worried about their next gig, worried about what income was going to come in, and they lost all ambition. Whereas I decided I'd try and be as creative as I could. I've never had the luxury of time to go down and learn to play bass and drums again. I mean, I would never have had time to do that. But this time around, I used it to the positive, and it was easy to write about the themes that I was covering because I was feeling every inch of the sadness that was going into some of these songs, and also the light, little pieces of light that was glimmering from some of them as well. So it gave me plenty of things to talk about and to sing about. And it gave me an opportunity, like I say, to revisit my childhood when I started in bands. We all got around on the drums. We all got around, played the bass. We shared all those musical things, and I got a chance to do that again, which I'm really thankful for.
Yeah. Why is The World Today the title track?
Because when I started that song, it was 3 years ago, and I'd been sitting up late in America getting ready to come home from Nashville. And I was over there on a 3-week run with a friend of mine. And on my way back, I watched some news and I thought to myself, I needed a song to go into a demo session the next day before I flew back to Australia. And that title came along after seeing the state of what was going on in the United States of America. And I thought to myself, every day you've got to probably get up and make a conscious effort to do something to make the world a better place, to leave your politics at the door if you go into people's homes, and to obviously just be nice to people, it was so easy to see what divisions were over there and to see that if you were left or right, it didn't create a place I wanted to be in. I wanted to get out of there as quick as I could. And I think it was my way of saying how I'd like Australia to be when I got home, is that every day we get up, we obviously need to do something. Then the George Floyd incident happened, and I had to go back and rewrite the song straight away. It was one of the most distressing things I think I'd ever seen. And if I thought about the world today, that's one I would not want to live in if that was happening on the streets of Australia, let alone, well, it does happen here. We do have deaths in custody and things like that, and we can't avoid that. But we have to make sure we're doing things to obviously make the world a better place, starting with our kids.
You spoke about going back and rewriting or adding to the song. In general, how do you know when a song is done?
Well, it was only after losing my father and one of my friends to suicide that the last verse was finished. And it was evident that the song was really, it had a few little pieces that weren't complete of the puzzle. And songs are like puzzles. Every now and then you'll get all the pieces down real quick. Other times it's really, really hard to actually make them all add up, because, you know, it might be a song that's taken on, like World Today. It took on like 3 years of growth and things had changed. And when I saw the George Floyd incident, and then I lost two very close people to me through suicide, I think the last verse was going to always be what it is now. And that was when it finally felt complete. And it took a while, but I still questioned myself after that last verse, thinking, is it too raw? Is it just me that it's relating to, or is the song finished? And then I got to the end of that little sit down with it, because I wrote it myself. I was sort of doing a co-write with my own brain. And I just decided, well, I think that sums up exactly how I feel about the world today.
Yeah. There's some gorgeous guitar tones on this album. The song Drive in the Dark, there's some very emotive guitar. Is that you?
Yeah, that's me. I lost a really good guitar playing friend through suicide. And I sat down during COVID, still struggling with why he left. So there was a bit of darkness in there. Hence the title, Drive in the Dark. I sat down with an electric guitar with a big trem on it and just started playing chords. And I put a microphone on my amplifier and set the Pro Tools to go. And I think I must have just doodled for 15 minutes over these particular chords. It never really had a form. But then when I finished it, I thought, well, there's 3.5 minutes in there I can maybe make into an instrumental. And then I was going to leave it as just the big stropey chords. But then I thought, being a guitar player, you're going to overplay, of course. So I plugged in and got a lead tone, and then decided I would just freestyle over the 15 minutes that I had. And that was pretty much how that song was born. And I didn't intend it to run into the next tune, but as I was jamming over those 15 minutes, the motif for Be a Man started to become prevalent, because I was in E minor, and it started to actually talk to me. And I started writing the next song out of the 15 minutes of just stroking the guitar and just playing and just feeling the way I felt. I was so sort of a little bit confused as to why he left. He left 2 young kids and a beautiful wife. And it bothered me a lot. And that song was a way of actually paying homage to him. He was a great guitar player, but also paying homage to the ones he left behind.
Yeah. I noticed in 2 or 3 songs, and I Still Believe in particular, a bit of a surf guitar vibe. I'm just wondering, were you into bands like The Ventures and The Atlantics and Dick Dale? Did that music have an impact on you at all?
Yeah, I never really knew a lot of the artists that played the surf music, but I loved the music itself. My guitar teacher when I was 10 was right into the Shadows, and she started me on them. And instrumental music only resonated with me from that moment on, when I was like 10 years old. But every time I heard one like a Dick Dale or The Ventures, I was always just sucked in. And the reason I was sucked in was the reverb. I just loved the sound of the big surfy reverb. And they were definitely the inspirations behind some of those Strat style things. The guitar I got given a couple of years ago prior to COVID by a fellow called Greg Truman, who makes electric guitars in Adelaide. And he had one of his last ones with an original sort of a Strat style headstock that he had to change because I think there might have been a lawsuit impending. And so he said, I've got to give this guitar away. What do you want to have a go of one of my guitars? I said, mate, I don't do endorsements. I gave up on the Fender thing years ago. I said, but please send it over. It's probably going to be worth a try just to see what it's like. And I honestly fell in love with it. The thing weighs about just 6 pounds, and it's got the hugest neck of any guitar I've ever found. And he doesn't even know where the neck came from. He built the body and he put it all together. And it became my go-to Strat. I've always been a Telecaster player, but I've always dabbled in Strats. And this thing had its own voice. And I really, really wanted to be able to make sure it featured on the record. And that's where it came from with those surfy style things. I just fell back in love with the trem and the back pickup of a Tele plate over the front.
Yeah. I believe you used a 1942 Martin in a lot of the writing and probably on the recording too. Tell me about that guitar, how you come across it.
Yeah, I was doing a thing that was involving a lot of school kids and a lot of adults who are wanting to get back into songwriting and playing. And the program was called The Legend and the Locals. So they called me the legend, and they dragged me around all these incredible Queensland towns. And every day we'd actually do songwriting workshops with people and kids. And then we'd also have a person that would feature to do a duet that night. And then we'd have a school group and do a couple of gospel style songs of mine together. So we did about 12 of these shows, and they were incredible fun. The last gig, I was about to finish sound check, and this old man pulled up outside the hall where we were playing in Mount Morgan in Queensland. And he said, I've got a guitar I want to give you. And I said, oh, wow. I said, what is it? He said, it's an old Martin. And I said, you do realise these things are worth money, don't you? He said, we know what it's all about. We've got a letter from Martin. He said, it's screwed up and poked in the sound hole. I'll give it to you when you finish sound check. So I did the sound check and came back out, and I was handed a 1942 0018 Martin. And this thing was as light as a feather, incredible beat up. It had machine heads missing, no strings, but it did have the letter of the exact day and date it was made from Martin because of the serial number. So I took it home and gave it to Luke Calquist, who's an incredible builder in Brisbane. I said, Luke, do you think you'll be able to get this thing to work? It looks like it had been sat around a fire. Its neck was still straight, but it needed a lot of work. And within 6 months, new machine heads, some bracing and some cracks inside, this thing rang like a bell. And I went and picked it up, and I gave old mate some extra money because I know he went over and above what he should have put into this guitar to bring it back to life. But the songs that fell out of that guitar, I have to say, the first time I got it back, it still smelled old in the middle of it. It had this beautiful smell. It was still light as a feather. I sat in our bathroom with this incredible reverb and just strummed a chord. And I thought, wow, this thing is going to be more than inspiring. Straight away, the motif for Even Broken Hearts Can Fly fell straight out of the sound hole with the capo on, capoed in the second fret, only on 5 strings. So it sounds like a drop D, but it's in E. And I knew straight away that this was going to be an incredible guitar for songs. And I think I wrote about 80% of the record on it.
Yeah. Another one of my favourite tracks is Rainmaker, a very moody track. And it's got a great banjo in the background, which is very sparse but very effective. Who's playing the banjo?
Well, I was going to play the banjo because that's how I had sent the demo to my producer, Matt Fell. But Matt got sick of waiting for me to send him a banjo track while I was in isolation, so he did it himself. Okay. And he did a great job. And I wrote that song with Don Walker, and Don was so captured with the actual music of what I'd sent him and the story. And a friend of mine's great auntie, an Indigenous lady from up on the North Coast, had this ability, and one of my uncles had the same ability. They were able to say a word, stick an axe in the ground, and if a storm was coming and it looked really, really threatening, they could actually split the storm. And it was a mythical legend at home amongst our family. So I decided to write a song about her because women had the gift as well. And Don said to me, he said, this is an incredible story. It's one worth sharing. So I sent what I had, the bare bones of the chorus and all the verses with the place names that we both grew up around, because Don was from Grafton as well. So he knew these place names intimately. And I felt so thrilled when Don sent another draft back to me. He didn't mess with any musical stuff. He just went ahead and became the lyrical police. And what he added was just astounding. He had one line in there that talked about cleaving a song in two. And when that was one of the first things that stood out to me, I just thought to myself, wow, I'm so glad I got a friend like Don every now and then to send a lyric to, who comes back with such intimate knowledge of my country, where I'm from, because he knows it so well. And then the percussion on the track was something that haunted me until I listened to the test pressing of the vinyl the other day. I'd forgotten how beautiful and emotive the actual mood was on the song until I heard it with that analog crackle the other day when I listened to the test pressing. And it's one I'm really, really proud of, actually.
Yeah. Ian Moss is on the album as well. You've got quite a relationship with the Cold Chisel guys. Tell me about how that started.
Well, I think the relationship started when we first got in underage to watch Cold Chisel play. I was 15, and I remember I'd actually spewed before we got in. We'd drunk that much outside the club, getting ourselves ready for this gig. And I've told Don this story since, and he thinks it's very, very funny. But we were so excited. We drank a little bit too much, whether it was the summer wine or whatever it was outside. We got in because I had an uncle who was on the door. He was a local football player. And he said, as long as you don't start any trouble, I'll let you in. And we got in and we watched Chisel completely take South Grafton Ex-Services Club apart with their set. And they came on for an encore that went almost half as long as the show, because Don was back in Grafton. I think he had something to prove, you know. And that was one of my lasting memories as a 15-year-old, was how long the actual encore went for. They did not stop. They just kept giving and giving and giving. And so for me, that's where that love affair of Chisel started. It started with visiting Don when he was living just up at Elizabeth Bay here. And we got together and wrote some songs. I wrote a song called HQ 454 Munro with Don for one of the Chisel records. I think it was No Plans it came out on. And that was taken from all the car culture of Grafton, where I grew up, and poured into a Cold Chisel song. And Don absolutely loved the sentiment of the song. So that's where that started. And then I met Jim crossing paths somewhere at a festival. And then he asked me to sing a song with him, which was Bird on a Wire. And with Ian Moss, we got to support him back in 1988 or 89 when he was on the Matchbook tour. We fell in love with Ian in Chisel, of course. But when Matchbook came out and we were the opening act for 4 shows, we were endeared to him no matter what. I've never told him that we did the opening support act things to him all those years ago, because I almost feel like I'm going to embarrass myself when I'm talking to him. But he always comes over to the house with amazing things to give if you're going to write a song. And I always try to make him feel as comfortable as possible by sitting him on an electric guitar and a nice little amp and a great overdrive. And he feels, and no matter what he touches, it sounds like Ian Moss. So my comfort levels are so much better when Ian starts to play. So my love affair with Chisel has gone on and on and on. A couple of songs on this record were shortlisted for Chisel Records over the last 18 months. Parole was one of them, and so was South. And there was another one that Ian and I had written called Nullarbor Plain, which we're going to sit on for a while, because I reckon it's got a home somewhere. But I really, really loved Chisel as a kid. And I think there's quite a few little Chisel elements that have made their way onto this album through my relationships with the 3 of them.
Yeah. As I said earlier, there's some great guitar tones on the album. Were there much effects happening, or was it mainly just guitar and amp?
Well, I had a Bassman reissue that was hand-wired by, I think, Martin Kell in Sydney. And he took this thing back to 1959 specs, and a mate of mine owned it, and I knew exactly where it was. So because I was flying from Brisbane to Sydney, I thought if I used that one main amp turned up, I wouldn't want for another one, and I was absolutely right. But I had my effects pedals on the floor, and most of them were off, but most of them are true bypass anyway. And so I just pick and choose whatever I needed to. But there was one old pedal that I kept using through the whole process of the recording, whether it was like a low gain thing or whether it was like full on stacked with something else. But it was an old Nobles pedal. And Tommy Emmanuel gave me the Nobles pedal probably 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And he said, I don't use this anymore, but I believe it was Steve Lukather's, so you can have it. And he told me the albums he played on it with The Journey. And he said, so there's a little bit of magic from The Journey that I'm giving you. And this one pedal, Chris, that played the other guitars with us as well, he fell in love with it. And it's just a basic green pedal with 3 knobs. And it's not a tube screamer. It's actually its own thing. But that's one of the most commonly used sounds on the whole record for me, because it was so different to what Chris Canzelis was using on the other side as the rhythm guitar player. And a lot of the lead tones come from that. And it was stacked with a pedal from a fellow called Jesse Davey, who's an English blues guy, and he makes his own pedals. This was the blues power. So I stuck both of them together on a lot of the lead tones on certain things with that Strat. And I was so happy with the way it sounded. I've just left the board exactly the same for the live shows now. So I know if I'm going to stomp on both of those things and cascade them, I know exactly what sound I'm going to get no matter what amp I'm plugged into.
Talking about guitars and great guitars, you recently did an interview with Sean Sennett for Sony's podcast. And I wanted to get you to retell the story of Willie Nelson's guitar, Trigger, when you actually got to play it.
We were lucky enough through Sony Music when I was first signed here in my 20s to get the support show slot with the Highwaymen. And it started as 5 shows. They sold out so quick, it ended up being 10 shows. So by the 3rd show, we were all sitting around looking at Trigger at every sound check, and it had a bodyguard. And he was a big bikey guy. And he could see that we were basically looking at it in awe. And he came over to us at about the 3rd or 4th sound check and he said, boys, do you want to play Trigger? And we all looked at each other and went, mate, is there a mustache in Mexico? Of course we want to. So we all took turns to sit for about 10 minutes with this beautiful old 1969 nylon string Martin with all the holes and signatures all over it. And my first strum, I've got to tell you, no word of a lie, was one of the most inspiring strums of a guitar. He even turned the amp on for us to make sure it was the true sound of what the actual thing possessed. And I remember the look of it and thinking to myself, how many songs have been written on this particular guitar since 69, whether it was Crazy or Hello Walls or whatever it was. I was just gobsmacked. I'm still the hugest Willie Nelson fan. And after that, I also showed Willie how to play, by the end of the tour, I showed him how to play the didgeridoo as well in his dressing room. And that is an amazing experience to talk about as well.
Yeah. The album World Today is out March 19. If COVID behaves itself, what's on for the rest of the year?
Well, we've got some festival shows coming up. We start with some wineries with Midnight Oil. I also got involved in the Makarrata project that Midnight Oil put together. In the height of the busyness of 2019, they got in touch with me about it and said would I be interested. But in the middle of COVID, I got to record my tracks because I was at home with my microphone with Jim Magini on the other end of the line saying, would you like to do a duet with this song with Peter? And it all grew out of that. So we're starting with that. We've got Blues Fest. I've got a set of songs for Blues Fest if it goes ahead. Praise the Lord. Let's just hope it does. And a lot of them are the songs from this new record as well. I think it'll be wonderful to share the stories of incarceration from my family's perspective, but the stories of, losing my dad, going through trying to repair a marriage that was definitely in big trouble, and also talking about family stories I think that you've never shared before. It's a time to be truthful. It's like that in Australia about Indigenous issues as well. The truth is what's going to really help us all get on the same page. And I think this is probably the most truthful record I've ever had to make because I had the time to sit down with that drum kit and that bass and create things that had no barriers at all. So this album's been waiting to be made, I think, for the last 20 years.
Yeah. Well, Troy Cassar-Daley, it's always great to catch up. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, Greg.